I'm about to introduce you to one of my favorite people, Paul Yock. Paul is the Martha Meyer Whelan Professor in the School of Medicine and Professor of Bioengineering Emeritus at Stanford University. He began his faculty career as an interventional cardiologist at UC San Francisco and then moved to Stanford in 1994. He is world-renowned for his work in inventing, developing, and testing new devices, including the rapid exchange angioplasty and stenting system, which is still the primary approach used worldwide. He authored the fundamental patents for intravascular ultrasound imaging. He conducted initial clinical trials and established a Stanford Center for research in cardiovascular interventions.
Let's just skip it.
But let me get to the end, though. So I'm going to skip a little bit. But I have to say that you're the founding director of the Stanford Center for Biodesign, dedicated to advanced training in medical technology innovation, and one of the primary reasons that I'm here at DxD HealthTech. Thank you, Paul.
Well, and thank goodness you're here, Ingrid. So I titled this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, how to be strategic, but not too strategic about your career. And when Ingrid asked me to do this, my impression was I'm really not qualified to give a career talk. I haven't been involved in the blocking and tackling in companies. And more than that, I chose medicine because I thought I wouldn't have to make hard career decisions. I could just go step by step through the different phases. Well, that turned out not to be the case. And I guess that's the main message of what I'm going to say is for me, going off-road and doing different things than my plan turned out to be really satisfying. So with your indulgence, I'll talk about kind of what that process was like, where I struggled with decision-making, and some things that I did right and others that I did not do right. So this is not to say that a plan is a bad thing. I want to advocate having a very explicit plan. I think you should write down at each stage of your career what you're looking for in the next stage, being as specific as possible, and then use that list as a kind of a prototype to take out and discuss with people in your company, friends, and so on. It helps crystallize your thinking to have something specific that you're addressing, and then revisit that plan at a reasonable period, at least every couple of years. This is a framework that I like for this, and some of you are familiar with this. Your companies probably use this, called OKRs, stands for Objectives and Key Results. Developed by Andy Grove at Intel, and then John Doerr sort of refined it, and it's used at Apple and Google and lots of other companies. And the big point is, again, be explicit. Think about what a few objectives are for your career. That might be what position you're looking for, what do you want to accomplish within that position, what are the financial returns that you want to see. And then the key thing is to anticipate in advance, what are the key results that you're going to look for that will allow you to measure whether you're having success or not. So if you were, for example, doing a financial objective, I want to build financial stability for my family, you'd write down key results like, okay, I want to have a college set aside for my kids. I want a certain percentage of 401k. I want enough extra money for a vacation. You get the idea. It's being specific. So that's good for short-term and medium-term planning. I want to mention one other thing, which is I think it's a little bit different to think about long-term planning. Something we challenge our students and fellows with is to try a thought experiment in long-term planning. And that is, what would it look like if you were like beyond your expectations successful? And we say, think big about this. So what this does is it loosens you up to really try to figure out what it is that drives you, what really would give you deep satisfaction. So try that as a thought experiment. All right. So back to this plan that I had and the bumps I had along the way. The first bump was in college. I started out thinking I would be a pre-med, and then I really started to like the humanities. And so I stopped, my chemistry major switched over to a humanities major and really got wrapped up for a long time in trying to decide which direction to go, medicine or humanities philosophy. And I wish I knew at that time about Fredkin's paradox. So Edward Fredkin was a brilliant computer scientist, also sort of a philosopher psychologist at Carnegie Mellon. And what he said, Fredkin's paradox, is the more equally attractive two alternatives seem, the harder it can be to choose between them. Simple sounding, but it really is important to realize that if you're getting wrapped around the axle of a decision, a career decision, and you just can't decide, it's probably because both outcomes are pretty equal, or at least you don't understand, you can't predict enough about those two outcomes to know. So stop wrapping around the axle and just move forward and make a decision. That's what I did. I decided to spend a couple of extra years studying philosophy, moved to England to do it. And as a kind of a sweet surprise, I had a little extra time, and because I was interested in philosophy and end-of-life care, I wound up spending a couple of months at this place called St. Christopher's Hospice in London. And it was the first hospice. Dame Cicely Saunders, who was a internal medicine physician, founded it. Long story short, this time spent in the hospice for me confirmed that I actually did want to be a doctor, go to medical school. Had no idea this was in my life journey to wind up at. So the moral here is that it's okay to take a flyer. It leaves some room for luck to intervene. I was really worried about the couple of years that I was spending on this flyer and that I was going to get behind everybody else. You have to think about that time in the context of your whole career. Don't worry about it. And of course, to circle back on something Omari said, experiencing another country and culture is an absolute major bonus if you can do it. So I did wind up in med school, and looking at this picture of Building A of my med school reminds me that I had a crummy first couple of years in med school. In fact, I thought pretty seriously about dropping out, and I wrestled hard with that decision. And it made me reflect on, how do you decide if you're in a situation in your career, how do you decide whether it's bad enough that you want to bail or you're going to stick it out? And the thing I didn't do that I wish I had, I kept that struggle to myself. I was embarrassed to talk to my parents and my friends about it. I mean, how can you be having so much difficulty? I wish I had put more daylight on the decision. What I mean by that, get really clear about what the issues are, and then talk about it, with colleagues, with your management, if you can, with friends and family. Just get it out there. That will help move you off of the impasse and would have saved me some suffering at the time, I think. So anyway, back to my plan. I did complete medical school, went through residency, and the next fork in my career, and what really threw me off the path, was a mentoring experience I had. Some of you know the name John Simpson, founded a company called ACS that became Guidant, the company that Deb spent time with. And I want to plus one something about mentoring that Deb mentioned. That is, sometimes it's worth working hard to find the right mentor. And I had figured out that John Simpson in particular was somebody I wanted to spend time with. I had to be kind of conniving to make that happen. I figured out a way to wind up moonlighting in his practice, and that in turn introduced me to Fogarty. And that led me to try something I never imagined I would, which was a startup. I had some ideas. They backed me in a company. And the thing I wanted to reflect on with you is that was an example of I didn't appreciate what my skill set was. And I want to advocate thinking hard about that for you all. So, I was busy training to be a doctor, and I was okay at that. But I had, both in college and in medical school, had tried to invent stuff. And I felt sort of silly about that, gee, I'm wasting my time. I should be studying. And it turned out this experience being mentored by Tom and John let me see that, hey, I'm actually kind of good at inventing stuff, and I should prioritize that. And so I did. And for the next years, spent time patenting, licensing, getting involved with companies, completely enriched my career experience. Now, there was one problem with that. So I was still working as a doctor and doing all of this other stuff. And I woke up one morning at age 40 and said, hey, I forgot to get married. Happily, I was working with Cynthia, who in a lapse of judgment agreed eventually to marry me. But I bring this up because I want to advocate. You all probably have better judgment than I did in my earlier years. But I think as you're doing your planning, be specific about putting in the important other stuff in your life, in your whatever list you're making if you're using OKR. So think about family and relationship, hobbies, travel, fitness, because they have big impacts on how you allocate your time, and they are really important to put in at any stage in your life. Again, hopefully all of you understand this. I didn't understand it so well, and I wish I had. So anyway, still changing the plan at this point. The final thing I'll say is lately I've had a chance to kind of combine the role at the university and the more entrepreneurial roles with Biodesign and D. And I want to put in a plug for finding ways to give back. I've done this, late in my career. It's really satisfying, and there's no reason not to start early on to build in at least some time. It just completely enriches your career. So final slide, final thoughts. So when you get to a branching path, like Yogi Berra says, when you get to a fork in the road, take it. There is rarely just one right career decision. You should be careful and intentional about making a plan, but don't get paralyzed in deciding. Just move on and understand that you're going to be continually reinventing your career, and that's fun and productive. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm sure you guys can see why he's one of my favorites.